Hello, colleagues. What is going on in Ukraine during the last week and around? We'll talk together with me, Ruslan Bortnik Head of Ukrainian Institute of Politics, today with you. The armed forces of Ukraine continue offensive operation in Melitopol and Berdyansk directions this week. Despite numerous reports that the Ukrainian troops during the offensive on the southern front were successful in the direction southeast of the settlement Rabotino and south of river Male-Tokmachka, as well as the southeast of Orekhov Zaporizhia region, south of the village of Rabotino in the area of Novopokrovka, where supposedly the first main line of Russian fortification begins, which will need to be overcome in order to reach the city of Tokmak. Real territorial changes between parties are local in nature, without significant transfer of control over the settlements or large territories. Also, Ukrainian troops are trying to expand the width of the front breakthrough by attacking the settlement of Verkhovna east of settlement of Rabotino. At the same time, the Russian army, without notable success, is trying to advance in the Kupiansk and Liman direction on the Torsk ledge. The battles in these areas are very heavy, with a significant amount of human and material losses on these sides. The intensity of the fighting in the Bakhmut and Donetsk direction has significantly decreased at the same time. The Ukrainian and Russian commanders are actively maneuvering their reserves, preparing for a new phase of the offensive and defensive operations that may take place, including of new sectors on the front. The Ukrainian counteroffensive may last approximately until November of this year, after which a pause can be expected. The minimum goals for Ukrainian troops on the southern front are the liberation of Tokmak and Polog in the Zaporizhia region and the approach of the Ukrainian control line to the coast of the Sea of Azov, which would make it possible to put the Russian land corridor to Crimea under artillery fire. Ukraine and Russian Federation are now more engaged in a war of attrition than the territory war. Western equipment has not yet arrived at the front in the promised quantity. Ukraine received only 50 to 80 Leopard tanks, although hundreds were promised before. In total, the Ukrainian army should receive about 240 Leopard, one A5 Leopard, two A4 Leopard, two A6 and so on, and also Challengers and other tanks. There is also a particular shortage of mine-clearing vehicles. Ukraine has long been demanding the transfer of long-range ATACMS missiles also. But the United States officials say it doesn't produce enough of these missiles to make a significant impact on the battlefield. The United States is already secretly preparing for a war of attrition that will last into the next year. Another problem is the lack of air cover, air defense. For this reason, the military leadership delayed the counteroffensive as long as possible. In fact, the history of aircraft deliveries repeats the belated deliveries that were observed with the tanks, air defense systems, precision and long-range ammunition and other weapons. At the same time, it is obvious that the training of Ukrainian pilots will take at least several months, 6 months or more, and therefore the massive use of F-16 aircraft at the front in the future should be expected not earlier than 2024. It will not affect on the current counteroffensive, it means. Although the first symbolic copies models may arrive in Ukraine before the end of 2023. In addition, there are signs of the accumulation of missile weapons by the Russian Federation on the eve of the new winter season of Ukraine to strike at the Ukrainian energy sector. Against this background, the Western press continues to disseminate information materials about problems with the counteroffensive, and it is also written that the Allies supply weapons to Ukraine with delays and in insufficient quantities. While Western countries postponing to provide the necessary weapon, the Russian Federation strengthened the defense, equipping minefields, and Ukraine suffered losses. This is largely due to the fact that Western partners do not want to increase the degree of confrontation with Russia, fearing nuclear escalation in one form or another. In the Russian Federation, a united internal military front is being formed in the war against Ukraine. I'm talking about the Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov are being strengthened after the defeating the Prigozhin team and all opposition team inside of Russia, which also means the increase of their responsibility for the failures of the Russian army in Ukraine. Also, August 23, 2023, as a result of crash of private airplane, the founder of private military company Wagner, Evgeny Prigozhin, and his closest associate Dmitry Utkin died. The plane crash happened 2 months after Prigozhin's rebellion, unsuccessful rebellion. The main version of the incident in the world community is based on the assumption that the death of Evgeny Prigozhin is beneficial to the President of Russian Federation Vladimir Putin or other law enforcement agencies of Russia, for example, FSB and so on, and therefore they are involved in it. It is possible that in this way the head of the Russian state sends a signal to the military, business, and political elites of the country that in the future attacks against the authorities, like the Prigozhin rebellion, will be suppressed in the most severe way. In general, the Prigozhin rebellion led to sweeps within the Russian system. Thus, about 20 Russian senior military officers were removed from duty or disappeared, including the former commander of the Russian Aerospace Forces, General Surovkin. It is known that many of these generals of the general staff of Russian armed forces were previously against a military invasion to Ukraine. There was also the liquidation of the military opposition led by Strelkov, Girkin, Wagner, most likely will be restructured later. Deputy of the State Duma of the Russian Federation, Lieutenant General Sobolev, said that Wagner private military company would cease to exist and the fighters would be able to go into civilian life or sign a contract with the defense ministry. This means that the Russian Federation will lose a very operational maneuvering military unit which often carried out the complex operations at the front, for example, heavy local offensives near the city of Bakhmut and the city of Solidar in the spring this year. The death of Evgeny Prigozhin restores the appearance of the lack of alternatives to Russian political system. After the riot, the living Evgeny Prigozhin acted as a destabilizing factor in the Russian Federation, and this gave Ukraine a chance for a quick victory in the war. On the other hand, Prigozhin was a conductor of ultra-radical sentiments in the Russian Federation. His actions in Belarus would create a serious crisis for both Ukraine and Poland. Some of the world's elites are becoming increasingly skeptical about the prospects for Ukrainian counteroffensive and are now considering various scenarios to end the war. In particular, some of them imply that Ukraine will come to terms with the actual loss of the part of its territory in exchange to membership in NATO or the European Union, or even simply the promise of long-term military and economic assistance. One of the main arguments in favor of this is that the West can stop the war without negotiation with Russian President Vladimir Putin while retaining most of the territories and the current political course for Ukraine. But such options cannot be officially accepted in Ukraine. Mikhail Podolyak, advisor of the head of the president's office, said that the war could end at any moment, but always on Ukrainians' terms. The skepticism of the allies mainly stems from problem in the global economy, uncertainty about how long the Western countries will maintain the current level of assistance to Ukraine, as well as disbelief that Ukraine will be able to completely oust Russian troops from all our territories. The result of the counteroffensive will also determine the starting position of the authorities on the eve of a possible presidential election campaign in Ukraine. United States Senator from the Republican Party, Lindsey Graham, on the August 24 at the press conference in Kyiv, told President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky that elections, presidential and parliamentary, should be held in Ukraine in 2024 despite of the war. In fact, this is a signal that in the West, at least, they want the team of Volodymyr Zelensky to share power with other political players. Since the next parliamentary elections will not take place in 2024, it is likely that the complete dissolution of the cabinet of ministers in this state will not be avoided. And the current Prime Minister, Dmitry Shmyhal, will retain his position at last until the next election, presidential or parliamentary, if they will be held in March 2024. The fate of the government will depend on negotiation with Western creditors also, with budget process also. But during this autumn-winter, personal changes in the power bloc are possible, very possible. Another scandal with purchases, with tenders for the military, new scandal with the purchase of Turkish uniform, worsens the chances of Alexei Reznikov, current Minister of Defense, remain in his post. The likely resignation of Reznikov may also lead to a change in the role of the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, to resignation or transfer to another position. Constant corruption scandals during the war undermine public confidence in the authorities at all. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, said that he would propose to the Parliament of Ukraine, Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, to equate corruption with to leverage the corruption with treason of for the period of the martial law. But the corresponding bill was introduced to the parliament by the ex-speaker Dmitry Reznikov. From it follows that its adoption will not necessarily take place, since Dmitry Reznikov now rather acts as an opposition to the authorities. It is also possible that in this way the authorities will test the public opinion regarding this initiative and bargain with officials and representatives of the Ukrainian elites. On the main issues that is currently discussion between the political and military leadership of the country is mobilization. The armed forces of Ukraine require increased mobilization to recruit at last another 300,000 or 400,000 people into the army. But the new mobilization will have a negative impact on public opinion and on economical situation in the country. Therefore, the political leadership of the country is against it, and the President Vladimir Zelensky himself declares such a position. He believes that now is necessary to speed up the process of solving problems with military enlistment office and military medical commissions, and then discuss a possible increase of mobilization. It is obvious that the office of president is trying to take into account the fact that significant war awareness is already accumulating in Ukraine society and are occasionally approaching the issue of mobilization. According to a study by the Reznikov Center, in general, 42% of Ukrainians believe that if the aggressor intensifies rocket attacks on Ukraine cities, Ukraine should still continue to fight, no matter what. Another 21% of respondents would prefer to try to freeze the conflict, but not to make a concession compromise to Russia. Another 23% of respondents believe that the negotiation should be started. That is, in total, 42% of Ukrainian citizens is one way or another would like to end hostilities. It is noteworthy that is a study, by the way, is beginning conducted by a sociologist close associated with Ukrainians' Western allies. Less than half of those surveyed are in favor of continuing the war under any conditions, 42, but only 23 are in favor of negotiations. 62% are against negotiations, and 50% hide their opinion. This data may be an indicator of war awareness in the rear of Ukrainian society. Everyone is waiting for the results of the counteroffensive. If they are significant, the pendulum will swing on the other direction, and vice versa, even vice versa. As long as there is more than significant data in the survey without the unwillingness of society to compromise with Russian Federation, as a result, the authorities remain legitimate as long as the request of society to fight is fulfilled. Thank you, friends, for watching this long and not very easy for me summary of the week for Ukraine. Please write down your questions behind and under this video. I will be lucky to answer for all of this. Also, I call you to celebrate the Knowledge Day, the 1st September, and I want to wish our and your children to go to the best schools in the world, which are standing up under the only clear skies, without any war and without any dangers. Thank you, friends. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and see you next week. Bye-bye.